Welcome. Hi, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever you're deciding to watch this episode. Basically, what we've done is it's International Week and we don't have any Millwall. So rather than doing Mill-related shows, we've done some football-related shows on a wider topic. And there's an interesting podcast what's been out about 2 weeks, 3 weeks now, what you might or might not have listened to, hence why I've got these two guests on the show. Hopefully I can guide you towards listening to it, and it'll be good to, continue the conversation really regarding the podcast. I'm joined by Amanda, who is the FSA Fair Cop on Twitter. Most Millwall fans will probably know her, or most Millwall fans will probably know her mobile number, and have asked her for help over the years. So welcome to the show, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Mickey.
And I'm joined by the co-host or the host of the said podcast, which is Gareth Roberts. And good evening to you as well.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Good. I've got the names right, and we can move forward now. So yeah. We'll start with you, Gareth, first. Explain a bit about the show and why you decided to front it as such. Obviously, you're from a quite a big name within the football fanzine and podcast world, and why you decided to run with the show. And then obviously I'll come to you after, Amanda, because I know part of it was something what you took to Twitter over. So we'll come on to that bit next. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been something that had sort of been in my mind for a while, that there's aspects of following football that, are not particularly good for us, that go into some extreme areas that, culturally we maybe don't address as football fans very often. We don't talk about it. We know it's there, but we don't necessarily discuss it. So I'm thinking, excessive use of alcohol, use of drugs, that becoming a regular thing attached to going to matches, and then hooliganism as well, which is, all in the mix as well. And what in my head, if we were ever going to tackle it, I wanted it to be not a sensational thing, not a tabloid-esque thing, more of a, well, let's talk about the people who were involved in it and sort of ask them why. Now that had been something that had been kicking around in my head, and I'd never really known how to truly approach it. And me and Amanda talk on the regular anyway about sort of issues in football, and she's been on the Anfield app on numerous occasions over the years, and we just had a conversation, and you mentioned the Twitter thread in particular, off the back of a conversation she'd had with a fan who was basically saying he was involved in something, he was wrapped up in it, it overtaken his life, if you like, to the detriment of relationships with friends and family. And the most interesting part of it was that he was sort of saying to Amanda, I'm paraphrasing here, but that he didn't know a way out. He didn't know. He knew it was wrong. He knew he wasn't exactly a great person to be around, and wasn't particularly liked by a lot of people and things like that. But he didn't know how to end that section of life and turn elsewhere almost. And we talked about that, talked about how interesting that was, and then. Amanda, through the number of people that she speaks to, you mentioned, obviously people know Amanda and they ring her up if they get in trouble around football matches. We're able to identify a number of individuals really that we could potentially speak to. But then what we also wanted to do with it was, speak to police, speak to people who are involved in the league, speak to people involved in mental health and things like that, get all different sides to this story, put a bit of a package together and see what we ended up with really. And that's what we did. And pleased to say that it's gone down well, and that the feedback on it's been good, and people have saw it for what it was, which was, an effort to tell a story in a sort of a non-judgmental way really. So it wasn't to say like, this is great or anything like that. And it wasn't to do down the individuals. It was just simply to tell their story. And, for spoilers for people who haven't listened to it. But when we got to the end, I mean, the end bit is a chat between me and Amanda. And we were like, well, we haven't got the solutions here, but it's more like we hope that it would spark a debate. We hope that it would spark discussion. And it seems to have done that to an extent. There's certainly, I mean, I'm sure Amanda can tell you more, but You know, we know that academics have taken a listen to it and are talking about it. Various people in the football industry have had a listen and talked about it. So who knows? It could be the start of something, and could be the start of football fans who find themselves in those predicaments being treated in a bit of a different way, rather than just ban them, jail them, and they stay in that cycle of bans and jails and the same behaviour.
No, I totally agree with you, and I've listened to the show, and obviously I've got some few points and stuff what I'd like to discuss with it. But I mean, before we come on to that side of it and we discuss it in a bit more depth with it, I mean, Amanda, I mean, for those who haven't seen, you did a thread on a subject on this, and there was quite a bit of feedback and so. But what was the original driving point for you to suddenly say something needs to be done? We need to look at this and see what we can do with this in a different way to how a red top newspaper or you know the media sensation world would do this. They would probably speak to these people you've spoken to, but in a way where they want to create a sensationalized headline and then basically kick them to the curb and say thank you very much and move on.
Well, I think like Gareth alluded to, the first chap I spoke to, let's call him Steve, that's the name I gave him on Twitter. I mean, what ultimately was really compelling for me was that, I mean, he was quite young, 21, 22, and yet very intelligent, very articulate, and was insightful enough to realise his lifestyle was alienating people. And again, as Gareth said, but couldn't find a way out of it. And to some extent, probably didn't even want to get out of it because the buzz, the adrenaline, that those male bonds that are formed. So I had a chat with Gareth, and as he said, he agreed that, you know, there could be a podcast in it. And I think everyone we spoke to, it wasn't about it wasn't about presenting them as sympathetic characters necessarily. It was just about presenting them as people, because I mean, football hooliganism, there's a whole industry, isn't there, behind it? I mean, the hoolie porn, it's glamorized, it's demonized, but nobody actually talks to the people involved in it to properly find out what makes them tick, what motivates them. And I think as well, there's also this stereotype idea that everyone involved in hooliganism is this knuckle dragging, brain dead idiot, but which they're not. They're very clearly not. You know, all the chaps that we met were likable men. You know, they were good company. They could tell a story, and that they all had a certain amount of intelligence about them. They were articulate, but ultimately, you know, that this very in-depth, ingrained passion that they had for their club translated it, you know, into this expression of violence when they met their like-minded counterparts at other clubs. And again, it wasn't about drawing a conclusion from any of it, not least because we're not qualified. But I think what struck me was some people just inherently have it in them to enjoy violence and fighting. And I think all of them said, didn't they, Gareth, that there was an element of enjoyment about it. It was the adrenaline, it was the buzz. One of them even said that he liked being punched. Now, I can't get my head around that in a million years. Maybe some of you are listening. I don't know.
I listened to that. I was like,
there's another one. I said to him, you know, this isn't much fun when you're like curled up in a ball on the floor, having had your head kicked in, literally. And he said, well, I don't mind, because it proves to everyone else that I didn't run. Right. I stood my ground. So that interests me. You know, I just think it's probably a uniquely male thing. It's probably something a lot of people can't understand. And again, it wasn't about making people understand it. It was just giving people a platform in a non-judgmental way to articulate their feelings, their thoughts, and why they involve themselves in the lifestyle that they do.
Yes. I mean, the question, what I'll probably raise from listening to it and all that is, I think some of the people what were on, I think it was listening to them what I got was it was more about camaraderie. It was more about a sense of being, like a sense of community as such within that football following. And some of the points of view, what they put were probably you could put into any part of life. You know, you start mixing with certain people and then it will escalate and then you'll get into bigger things with those, regardless of being away from football. But it seemed to me that it was like family, an environment. You know, you work hard Monday to Friday. Football was a release, the day out, ranging from the long away days to being with your mates, because some of the people you go football with turn into be good mates, better so than maybe people, you know, you've grown up with or you live around the corner from, because especially if you become sort of well known at football or people know you, you suddenly know lots of people. And I suppose a lot of that comes into it as well. You know, look, it's not my thing to be going out, getting in punch ups and all that lot. But on the same level, I'm not going to throw aspersions at people and say, oh, I think that's wrong, because there's been plenty of times where football hooligans have saved what I would class as scarfers and, you know, the shirt wearers and stuff from getting their heads kicked in on days out from other like-minded. So I do think there's a mix between them, but there was a familiarity between all the stories, as in how they got into it, and how they can't get. It's how they can't get out of it going forward. They just can't seem to find that out. I agree with stuff what you raised on the pod. You know, you're not gonna stop someone committing violence at football just by putting them in prison. Putting them in prison, banning them. You know, it's going to happen whenever they come off those bans or come out of prison.
But you're right. It was a common theme, wasn't it, Gareth? That everyone we spoke to, those bonds formed between all of their mates were really, really strong, to the point, you know, where they looked out for each other's mental health. They made themselves available to listen to their mates' problems. And I mean, I don't know, I'm not a bloke, but I mean, you can probably say, Gareth, whether those bonds are maybe stronger than a typical male friendship group because of the lifestyle they lead. Did you think that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just been touched on there, hasn't it? About the nature of, if you're a true supporter or a true follower, if you like, of your team, if you go home and away, if you go into Europe and all the rest of it, you know, it's a big commitment financially in terms of your time, etc. And so you can end up spending an awful lot of time with these people, and you know, not every group obviously ventures into some of the stuff that, you know, we got into on the podcast, what those people were in. But equally, I would imagine a lot of people that listen to this and listen to that podcast as well would say, well, yeah, I am really close and there are really strong bonds with, you know, people that you regularly go to match with, because you see them so often. I mean, you can get to the point where you're seeing them more than what, you know, some of your family probably and things like that. And I think some of the stuff that we pulled, actually, one of the contributors couldn't contribute in the end, shall we say, and it's explained in the podcast. But I remember him talking about sort of, you know, a wedding or a potential wedding, and he was saying, you know, like he would be inviting people from the footy before he would be inviting some members of his family and her family and things like that. And that sort of said it all to me. So yeah, there is very strong bonds, and then there's the whole. There's loads of complex aspects to it, I think, which, you know, you could have gone on forever with it, but we had to draw the line somewhere, not least because I was leaving the Anfield Rap. But, you know, we could have gone we could have gone and got a psychologist, or, you know, to look into that aspect of it. I think there were lots of interesting aspects that it brought up, and, you know, loads of it is, you know, there's ego stuff in there, and there's the idea of, you know, being on someone else's territory and being challenged and all those type of things. I thought a lot of that came across about, you know, you can't just walk into our manor and start saying X, Y, and Z, or acting like this and not expect to be challenged and things like that. You know, some people will listen to that, and some people have listened to that and fed back to me and gone, it's madness, all that. I thought all that had gone. I thought all that was like in the 80s or whatever. And I was like, well, I didn't. I kind of knew, you know, I'd heard enough over the years that it still went on, but it just doesn't go on in your face. It doesn't go on in and around grounds. It's not, you know, for obvious reasons, because there's CCTV everywhere, because there's, you know, camera phones everywhere and things like that. But there is an aspect of there's a tribal nature to it, isn't there, ultimately? And you know, football is tribal, but it's to what extremes you end up taking it. And obviously a lot of the people we spoke to on this, they took it to an extreme. And you know, some of the people we spoke to on there were at different stages of the journey. I think some of them were saying, well, I'm still in and I want to stay in and I can't see myself getting out. Some people were completely out. Some people were out recently, you know what I mean? And there was different views and different stages of journeys in there. But even then, I think you could hear in some of their stories that they were torn. Do you know what I mean? There was it's almost like the chimp paradox thing, that, you know, the Steve Peters thing, where, you know, you got one part of your brain saying one thing and another part of your brain, a more, you know, I don't know, primeval part of your brain saying something else, if you like. And I think there's a big element of that in there as well. I think, you know, one of the discussions was about age, wasn't it, as well, and about the fact that, you know, with age comes responsibilities and all that kind of thing. And that's why, you know, you're less likely to see older fellas, because it is mainly fellas, as we said, getting involved. But then there are older fellas who are involved in some of the other things we touched on. So, you know, drinking excessively, now using cocaine and things like that. And, you know, I thought there was a really good point in the podcast made by one of the contributors where he was saying, well, people start associating that with every single time they go to football. And, you know, bearing in mind, you can be playing, 3 times a week virtually sometimes and things like that. You know, that's A, a lot of money, and B, a lot of damage that you're doing to yourself. Because I don't want to get preachy with people. People live their lives how they want to live them. But, you know, ultimately, like, you know, there is a danger attached to some of this behavior to yourself. Never mind people around you, etc. And, you know, I think it made, I can't remember what's made the editing didn't these days, because it took so long we had 8 hours of stuff that we squeezed down into what you hear on the podcast. But when we spoke to the police officer who regularly polices football, he was talking about cocaine on the streets and saying, well, they've never pulled anything in that was more than 30% pure. So, you know, for people that do regularly do it, you know, I would just say, well, you know, what is it you're putting inside yourself here? I'm not getting preachy. I'm just passing on a fact that we came across on that podcast that made me think, because I just thought, only 30, well, what's the rest of it then? Do you know what I mean?
I think there was a couple of points that were raised by a couple of people. What were very interesting is before the cocaine become as prevalent as it is nowadays, but it is nowadays within society, was that people used to be able to drink first, but now people not necessarily have learned how to drink first. It's basically taking powder or sniff to compensate the alcohol if they're sort of having a bit too much to be able to keep going. And when you're talking, you know, 7 o'clock, you're starting your first beer, it's a long old day to be on. And I'm not saying it affects everybody in the same way, because it doesn't, but there are some people what potentially won't be able to handle that, where you're talking about safety for their self and their own well-being, where potentially, you know, there's concerns for them. I just think that a lot of the issue, what was raised with the alcohol, with the drug side of it, it's a massive society issue, not necessarily a football issue. And it was quite interesting to listen to the police officer, who pretty much said the same. Normally, you'll get police officers going, it's a football problem. It's a massive football problem. It's not. It's a massive society issue. And unfortunately, because you have all of society in pockets at football, it's always going to look bigger than it actually is.
We're all, aren't we, painfully aware of that? We're painfully aware how football and football fans are treated in this little bubble away from society. So you only ever hear about cocaine being a problem among football fans. But as you say, nobody is really talking about boxing. I would hazard a guess that there's just as much, if not more, coke flying around at boxing.
And horse racing.
Football and horse racing. And as you say, it's a society problem, but it's much easier, isn't it, for politicians to jump on the bandwagon of football fans, something must be done. And I think ultimately what underpins all of that is an absolute fear that we're going to see wholesale hooliganism return as we did in the 70s and 80s. And ultimately, what is football? Football is a product that generates billions of pounds for the economy and in taxes. And I think that that's the sort of unspoken reason for all of this. It's not about so nice families can go to football without some bloke shoving a load of coke up his nose. It's to protect a multi-billion-pound industry.
100%. Because if you look at beginning of the season, Fulham Liverpool, it was £90 for an adult ticket, and I think it was £60-70 for a kid's ticket. So if you're aiming and you're blaming, that families don't go to football because of hooliganism, because of people taking cocaine, because of excessive drinking, etc., then you're talking bollocks. Because when clubs are outpricing families to go to football, you're not going to get families there. I mean,
well, you are, because aside from anything, define family. We all know that family within football is a euphemism for nice people that turn up, spend a lot of money in the club shop, buy a lot of food and drink, sit down and don't cause anybody a problem. That's what I think is meant by family within a football context.
Yeah, I would say that football, and I think we've probably all been heavily involved in our football clubs to a degree, as in behind the scenes, more so than, just going to games. Obviously, Amanda, we've spoken numerous occasions, and I probably say that you've probably been around fans and dealing with fan issues and stuff like that as well, Gareth, where you suddenly realise that football clubs don't necessarily look at their fans as football fans. You become a spend per head. And it's about how much money I can take out of your pocket when you're in my premises. So if I'm getting 50, 100, whatever it is for a price of a ticket, I'm aiming to take the next £50 out of your pocket, whether that be on booze, whether that be on food, shirts, whatever it is. That's what I think they're interested in. And, if you look at rugby, you'll get the same loutish behaviour at rugby than what you do at football. Yet at rugby, it's lad culture. At football, it's classed as hooligan culture. I'm not saying you get the rivalry between the two fractions as much as you do in football, but you do get the, train journeys, the loutish behaviour, the excessive amount of drinking, urinating in streets, etc., more so within the rugby side, but that's not frowned upon compared to what it is with football.
Yeah, it does feel like that. There's no two ways about that, and that as Amanda said before, that's something we're all acutely aware of, isn't it? It always feels that football's the first place that people's come knocking for moral panic, really, and it's like there's an upturn in X and Y. Well, there's an upturn in cocaine use. I mean, there's an upturn in cocaine use absolutely everywhere, isn't there? Let's be honest. Like any pub, any bar, any town centre, any city centre, any weekend that you care to go. So, but that's not a story. That's the Times isn't going to send out reporters to go around with the police and tell you that, because they're not telling you something you don't know. But if you say that football fans are doing it, and you say that they're doing it, and it's out of control, and there's these people patrolling different parts of our cities and travel, causing chaos on the travel network and all of that, it's really dramatic, isn't it? And as you said earlier, well, I think it was before we started, wasn't we? We all have our concerns that do police want to boost their coffers at times by saying, well, you simply need more police around football? And what helps them do that? Create a bit of moral panic, create a situation that is perhaps bigger than it actually is, so that people say, well, something needs to be done. And then the club says, oh, well, what can we do? Well, we can pay for more police. And then the police go, thank you very much, and it's work. But I think more and more people are getting onto that now, to be honest with you. I think more than ever before, the people that speak out about this, and us three are probably among them, aren't we? It feels like there's a greater number of people behind us now. It doesn't feel like we're quite the minority we once were. It feels more accepted that you get opportunities to challenge that narrative. I know myself that, you know, I've done things with various media over the years where I've been given that opportunity, where I've literally had, you know, Mark Roberts has said X, and I've been able to say, well, Mark Roberts is talking out of his arse, and this is why. And, you know, I've literally done that on the BBC and things like that, and then it's being shared and people have seen it and people have got onto it, and, you know, we've all played a part in that, I think. And, you know, I've heard Amanda on 5 Live and things like that, you know, so it feels to me that doesn't go unchallenged now. And some of it was quite daft from the very top of football policing as well. Again, something we touched on off air, wasn't it? You know, making daft claims about what safe standing was going to lead to. Well, you know, when you've campaigned for it for years, when you've gone to Celtic Park and stood in that section, you know that it's not going to lead to these things that, you know, Mark Roberts was suggesting it was going to lead to. And then guess what? They've trialled it and it hasn't. Nothing's happened. It's been absolutely fine. I mean, and we were all confident that that's how it was going to be. And again, though, it's that sort of moral panic. It's that sowing a seed. It's, you know, creating an opportunity for football fans to trip themselves up and fall over. I mean, one of my concerns about the current climate and where we are right now is that there have been some things that have gone on that we've got to hold hands up and say, well, there's a minority of people who've not done us favours here as a football fan collective. So, you know, the incursions onto pitches and things like that, you know, and then, you know, the Billy Sharp incidents and things like that, that's fed into the other side, hasn't it? That has fed into, you know, there is a feral crew following, you know, almost every football team and all this kind of stuff. That's fed into the moral panic. And I think sometimes we've got to say as football supporters, well, there's some among our number here who aren't doing us any favours. And I think if you point that out and you say that out loud, you know, that's fine. I mean, going back to the podcast, that's sort of one of the things that interested me about doing it, is that there's things that seem to go unsaid in fan culture sometimes. Like I thought it was great when, you know, some of the contributors were saying, I've gone to my mates and said, I think you're having a bit too much of that, you know. I think you're doing that too often. You're not doing yourself any favours here and things like that. That was good to hear for me, because I think it can become a bit glamorized at times. You know, like, you know, I don't want to be preachy. I'm not trying to be preachy, but I'm just saying, like, you know, if you go into football 3 times a week, and you said it yourself before, and that becomes associated with not just the drink, but, you know, a bag every single time and things like that, that is not sustainable for anyone. Do you know what I mean? Not sustainable money-wise, not sustainable health-wise. And then, you know, what detriment are you doing to family, friends, career, all of those things? So I think those honest conversations are good, and those honest conversations are a way forward. And sometimes we do have to sort of turn it in ourselves and talk to each other and say, well, what can we do here? Because, you know, as much as I found some of it comedic, you know what I mean, in terms of, because I'm a Scouser and I'm from where I'm from and we talk how we talk, and then, you know, I'm interviewing people and they're going on about the old Bill and all this. And the old Bill got a lot of blame in that podcast, I thought. But equally, I thought some of the lads were really honest about, well, this was me this, or this was me and my mates this. And actually, when we look back, yeah, we did need to knock some of this on the head. I thought that was a good aspect of the podcast.
I think within football that, you know, and I'm not a lover of the old Bill. I think, you know, some of the times what they do is a fucking joke. The way they treat people is a joke. I think that the problem you have with football is that they throw a lot of people at it from an officer point of view, who've probably had very little, if any, real training within an environment. And then, for instance, you're throwing people in. Millwall will have a reputation regardless of who we're playing. But it's like, you know, you could have a copper, a couple of years, you know, experience in the force, relatively easy bearing into the police force, and all of a sudden they're at an Everton, Liverpool, Man United, you know, some of these where there are quite vicious rivalries and it's a very hostile environment, where all of a sudden their adrenaline from dealing with a fight on a Saturday night between 6 blokes to suddenly having 1,000, 1,500 away fans walking next to them, screaming, shouting, you know, pretty intimidating. All of a sudden, they're already panicked. I mean, look at, there isn't a court case going on, so I can say it because unfortunately he took his life. But the police officer with the Sheffield Wednesday fan, Amanda?
I think so, yeah.
Where, you know, all of a sudden there was a little bit of kickoff. He's gone steaming across the road and battered the geezer across the head. Where in the world are you ever going to do that? You know, he would have never have done that in a normal environment, but because it's football, adrenaline, everything else involved, all of a sudden, bosh, you've got a young kid, head split open, purely only because he's at football.
I think you're right. There's some footage from a League Two game going around, and it all got a bit silly at the end. Just kids being idiots, you know, thinking they're big men when they're not. Anyway, suffice to say, it could have been dealt with by a very different approach. But a few of the cops steamed in. They let off their parva spray. The batons were out, but you can see from the footage, the older cops are like, oh, let's just bang their heads together, not literally, metaphorically, and get them off home. And the younger ones are visibly shitting themselves because, A, they've got the backdrop of this is football, they can kick off at any second, they're all hooligans, it's disorder, they've watched Green Street, they've seen all the films, they haven't had much life experience, and there's no... You know, and off the back of last season, when, like we've all said, there were those various incidents, then we've had a moral panic all summer, haven't we, with statements coming out left, right and centre that policing is going to be robust, everyone's going to be prosecuted. So the cops are going into this environment against this backdrop thinking, oh my God, it's going to kick off any second. They've got no real knowledge or understanding of football crowds. And yeah, they react in exactly the way as you describe.
The problem you've got with football fans right now, what I see it as, and maybe I'm wrong, but the Euros wasn't what I would class as football fans being the contributors of the trouble there. And also the fact that cocaine now can get you an FBO, as in it never used to. It wasn't, you couldn't use possession as a reason for an FBO, which obviously you can now. I am correct there, aren't I, Amanda?
It's not law at the moment, but it will be.
But it's coming though, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah, it's coming. But no, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, how many of those people down Wembley Way were regular match goers?
No.
I would say very few, but we will never know because the analysis isn't done. But that ties very nicely into what we've, you know, the various subjects that we've been speaking on. It's very easy for the media to report that as football fans, yobs, hooligans and everything else. And God, you know, a lot of what we saw that day was disgusting. It was awful. It was horrible. You know, I know people that were there with their kids and their kids were really scared. They had to go home again. And, you know, you can't even begin to start justifying or condoning that. But, you know, where was the sober analysis of that? Where was the context? Where was the nuance? And in a similar vein with Liverpool in Paris, you know, as soon as those images started circulating, all the stereotypes came out, all the, you know, insulting shit came out again, fake tickets, late fans, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, there was lots of locals there as well, steaming the gates, trying to get in, and they were wearing Liverpool shirts. So immediately they are Liverpool fans. Well, are they? sticking on a Liverpool shirt doesn't make you, but again, it's that same narrative and it's that same parallel and it's that same agenda of how easy it is to demonize a whole group of people based on historic behaviour.
But I bet if you looked at the guy who ran on the pitch for Billy Sharp, you look at the guy who ran on that time and got Grealish, you probably look at a few of the other instances where they've gone on and actually analysed, you probably find they might not even go to a lot. We've had it at Millwall where there was people what done outrageous behaviour. What we're not talking, normal stuff. What is associated with football, where whether that be the football violence, whatever. I'm not associating that, but people who've done racial gestures or people who've done different bits of pieces, they aren't regular fans. It's just literally that they buy an odd ticket, they go, and all of a sudden what they do is very damaging, reputationally for everyone involved, because the media want the headline. Once they've got that headline, it's gone, especially with Millwall, where, we had the Sun come in and swab all the toilets. And because cocaine was found at Millwall, we were the Antichrist. And I bet that if you went around every football stadium in the country or every pub in the country, you'll probably find the same recordings, what they did. I mean, an interesting one, what you never tapped in on the show, and I don't know if you've got the numbers or not, but I mean, do we know what the arrest rates and stuff regarding cocaine at football is? I mean, is it any higher than outside society, or is it just, again, it's that the perceived perception that it's higher at football than it is anywhere else?
The last season's arrest stats actually come out on the 22nd of September. So we'll know then. But again, it's a futile exercise because there's nothing to compare it to, because the arrest stats aren't collated in a way, try and find nighttime economy stats to compare to football matches. And you'll just not going to find them.
If you get arrested normally, you get drug tested now? No? I know you don't at football, but I didn't know you did. I don't know if you did out on the outside.
No, I think that there might have been a project, an initiative in one force where people who were arrested were asked if they could voluntarily submit a sample to be tested, on the understanding it wouldn't go any further. It was just for the purposes of research. But that's the thing with these discussions, isn't it? You can just jump from one subject to another. But Gareth, when we were talking to people, I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly don't remember any of our contributors saying, I have to take a load of Charlie to have a fight. But the narrative is sort of now, well, people are taking cocaine and fighting.
Yeah, the two have become joined together at the hip, haven't they? Whereas, I think you're right. I mean, certainly Gary, who was on the show, he's later developed an issue with cocaine, but he was fighting long before he went near it. So his addiction, as he called it on the podcast, his addiction to fighting came before any kinds of addiction to cocaine. I mean, it's always dangerous, isn't it, to draw lines over anything really on all sides around. I mean, one thing I worry about a little bit about, some of the behaviour sort of post-lockdown and things like that. So, some of it, an edge of it has been grim and an edge of it has been wrong. And I wonder whether, again, I'm sort of going off my own experience and things that I've seen and heard and know about that have gone on around my club. And I wonder whether has a little bit of the self-policing that was once there, dissipated a little bit. And if it has, why? So, there was obviously when Liverpool won the league, we went in the ground and, there were obviously gatherings, which at the time were illegal, not least around the pierheads and around the Liver buildings and stuff like that. Now, I didn't go down there myself, but, from people I know who did, the reports were that, during the day, it was fine, it was good-natured, it was, there was no issues. And then as time went on, a bit of an edge started to develop and then that's where some problems developed. And obviously you had some dick who was firing fireworks at the Liver buildings, and that became the headline then, do you know what I mean? But when there's a big group like that, or when certainly my experience of going to the match when I first started going and I was a gobby teenager, if I stepped out of line in any way or did something that broke one of the unwritten rules around watching football, an older fella would give you a little tap on the shoulder or a clip round the ear and say, lad, no, we don't do that here. Because it's back to what we're talking about a minute ago of, the consequences of the actions of a few can end up having an influence on the experience of the many, if you like. And I think that football fans know that. But once upon a time, they were more readily, up for challenging people who would step out of line. And I wonder if some of that's dying and wonder why and things like that. And I don't know the answer. I'm not a sociologist, a psychologist, or any of those ologies. But I do, it might be a bit circumstantial, my evidence for it, but I do just wonder, is that going? Is that dying out? Is that a thing?
Yeah, it definitely is, but it's not just at football, is it? I mean, I'm sure we've all sat on buses with a load of school kids that are just being really fucking annoying and bordering on aggressive to each other, and everyone just sits there on their phones, don't they? Nobody wants to look up and challenge them. And I think
another podcast here.
Yeah, I think perhaps there's a fear, because we're sort of maybe conditioned. I mean, it's ironic, isn't it, to talk about how younger people are stereotyped when we are so anti-football fans being stereotyped. But perhaps you look at a group of kids and you think, shit, if one of them got a knife. Kids nowadays can be bloody 6'4" and built like the proverbial shit houses. And I think that there's just a fear in society of what are the consequences going to be for me if I intervene in a situation or if I challenge behaviour. And perhaps even as well, if we're talking about younger kids, they can run off to the police, can't they, and say, that bald bloke over there, he touched me. And that might sound a bit dramatic, but kids know that they've got it in their power to make...
Fucking hell. Fucking hell, thanks for that. You know what I mean? I think I might have to bleep out her accusation there, do you know what I mean? Because someone will fucking sound clip that. Fucking hell, Amanda, thanks for that one.
Sorry.
I wouldn't have minded if Gareth has got fucking hair, but he ain't, is he? He's got hair, so I ain't. So I'm the only bald-headed one here. But yeah, nice for that, thanks. Is that the way we go now? Known each other for absolute years and fucking, there's the bus. Mickey's gone now. I'm pissed off with these school kids, so I'll just throw Mickey in front of the bus.
Sorry. For the record, listeners, of course, I'm not implying anything at all untoward. But I think there is...
I'm editing. You ain't doing anything.
Kids do have it within their power, don't they? I mean, I bet your kid at one point or another has said, you can't send me to bed, I'm bringing childline, I'm calling my teacher.
There's no fear. The problem is, nowadays, as society as a whole, there is no fear. You've got, people attacking women freely. You've got people attacking other people freely. Staying with the football, people fighting within football are like-minded people, okay? You've still got a large part of football where it's football fans who want to partake in that sort of thing. You don't have necessarily football fans going around beating up families. It's normally they attack like-minded people. The problem you've got with society as a whole, that there is no boundaries now. There is no fear. Looking at, all the looting, what goes on, where all of a sudden the mass crowds, where it seems to be coming up at the moment in looting and everything else, it's just no fear. So the problem is that you've got kids who are participating in gangs and everything else, possibly for the same reasons as the younger kids with the football, that sense of being, that camaraderie, everything else. But because the police aren't necessarily doing anything, the fear just disappears. So, they will behave however they want. You raise a subject and say, mate, what are you doing? You'll be told you're a cunt, and all of a sudden they're square up to you. So then you've got to make the choice of, am I going to, take this a step further, or am I just going to fucking melt away and walk away? And a lot of times people just don't want to get involved. No one wants to die just for telling someone to shut up. And that's the risk you've got nowadays. But you don't necessarily have that at football as much as it is in society. One point, what was a few people raised it and stuff like that is that I think as a whole with society is that mental health care is very, very poorly funded, very, very poor, poorly achievable right now. Hence why there's a lot of men action groups, men focus groups, walk and talk groups spouting up all over football, where there's an enticement of men together are more likely to talk to each other than you would with your pals in these groups where walking and talking what seems to be focusing up. I mean, how much of an issue is society, people wanting an escapism, and then unfortunately they get too far down the line to really know how to get back, with the fact that there is no mental health care for men. We hear the mental health within men all the time, don't we? Men have the highest rate of suicide. Men are more likely not to talk about things. Men are more likely not to go to the doctor. Men are more likely, you can carry on with the list. Men is this macho image of a man, hence why we get what we get from them. But is it turning with going back to the self-policing, but is the self-policing now being more about self-well-being?
Yeah, I mean, there is challenges, isn't there, around being a bloke, essentially, that don't maybe get talked about enough. And they can there's a huge range of that, from everything around, what you're wearing, what your appearance is. Men can be very cruel to other men, and the whole mental health thing, and being a bit kinder to each other. I think there are certain groups of men that that message is going to get to last, essentially. And like dressing room culture and things like that. I think we all like to think we've progressed as a society and certain things are off the table now. But then you hear plenty to say, well, they're not actually. These are some of the reasons that people can disappear down holes where they have got an issue around the mental health, but then they don't know how to talk about it because there is still a level of, the phrase man up still kicks around, phrases like snowflake, is kicked around. And, there is a macho element, a tribal element, like I mentioned before, to football itself. So even if you're not going the game, part of a group that's fighting or anything like that, the likelihood is at some stage you might have gone through a stage where you're hanging around with a group where you've got to wear certain clothes, or you've got to have a certain haircut, or you've got to have a certain coat, or you know what I mean, whatever it might be. There will be certain amounts of peer pressure, and if whatever you find yourself outside of these groups, that can be difficult to deal with. And then there's general life, and there's plenty of triggers for mental health problems, obviously. But you only ever get talk, don't you? The message is always talk. And I've challenged that myself to say, well, okay, but what you like just saying talk is fine. But I've had problems myself with my mental health, and I found that you need to talk to the right person is the key thing. Just talking to anyone doesn't work. Like
it's the waiting list as well.
Yeah, oh yeah, there's that as well. But I mean, like, you could unload all your problems onto a person, and they might nod along, but they don't know what to say to you because they're not an expert in that field, or they just, they're just taken aback by it, and so therefore you can sort of find yourself in the same place. And so yeah, talk, but try and talk to more than one person, or try and talk to someone who knows what they're talking about, or go to a GP, or go to one of these groups like what you're talking about. That would be what I would say. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. And also, you've got to be a little bit lucky. You've got to find someone who's good, essentially, someone who knows what they're talking about, and someone who can help you. And it took me a while to find someone who was right for me, if you like, who helped me. And I'm in a better place now through that. But that wasn't the case straight away. I would tell people, bounce things off people, and I could see in their eyes they didn't really want this conversation. They felt uncomfortable, and me just unloading on them, well, that might have helped a little bit, but it's more complicated than just say and talk. And what it really
100%.
needs, what it really needs is an acknowledgement that it's an issue, that it's that it's endemic, that it's here to stay, that it's a problem, and it needs investment in it. And as you say, there are waiting lists around absolutely every service, voluntary ones that you can get through the NHS, etc. And there are varying standards of who you're likely to see as well. So it needs money. It needs money thrown at it. It needs the government to recognise that it's a priority. And there's plenty of talk around it that I see, and plenty of things written, but not huge life-changing amounts thrown at it. But yeah, 100% that it's a thing in football, 100%, and things that fans have organised themselves, like you mentioned, like walk and talk groups and things like that. There are things like that have sprouted up around here, and they are positive things, because I think I said about it's hard to find the right people to talk to at times, but in a way, and Amanda touched on it before, some of these groups that we got a little insight into, and some of the ones that I know of around Liverpool, things like that, you can actually find situations where quite macho fellas start opening up to each other, and they embrace it. Do you know what I mean? They move away from the machoism for a little bit and say, well, yeah, I've felt like that. You know what I mean? I've had days like that, mate. Do you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, that aspect of talking is good if the other person's open to it. But like I say, not everyone is. Other people can close up themselves, or maybe they've got their own issues. You've got to be prepared to bounce it off more than one person, I think.
No, I think you're right. And I think sometimes it's stuff what you think you're only going through, or you're only thinking, you'll probably find, possibly in the groups you hang around with, that there's probably 3, 4, 5 others what are having the same thoughts as you. They're having the same, bad days, not wanting to get out of bed, hate their fucking job, hate their fucking missus, hate their fucking boss, etc., etc., etc. We all have those same things. But again, if all you're talking about is the football results and, the barmaid, and look at that and this, that, and the other, which notoriously you do, because you go to football to forget the world. Do you know what I mean? You go, football is like a massive antidepressant. You go to football for the hour and a half of football, or the day of football, to basically forget how shit the world is. If the world is shit, that's your lively line. And I think mental health. I don't necessarily think everybody suffers with mental health the same way, but if it is something that does bother you, then do reach out to people, do speak to people, do look to get. There are various fan-led organisations around clubs what are more than happy to speak to you. There's, you Keep Your Head in the Game, which is another organisation that does football to increase men talking, and a lot of the football trusts have mental health entities. But if we're expecting the government and a light to throw money at it, then I think we're going to be here for a long time. You only need to look at some of the organisations around football, Kick It Out. They've been underfunded for so long, when they could have done some real positive things over the year if they had, the funds to go for it. But hey, I'll come up towards an end where we go. But one of the things what I was interested to hear both your views, purely because of what you do, Amanda, and obviously with what the show was about, is how much is the society issue of likes and social media friendship and exposure is a problem nowadays within football, especially with the violence, where obviously the people doing it don't want their images being published all over, but you've got various accounts what come under away day names of various amounts, what seem to, glorify and post videos, what realistically does nobody any good apart from get people prison time. You're pretty much grassing on your own people for various reasons.
There's sort of subgroups within these groups, aren't there? So all of the lads that we spoke to wouldn't go anywhere near social media in a million years, because even though they're relatively young, they're old school. I mean, we'll all know pubs, won't we, where camera phones might not be welcome, and you just are respectful of that. I think that there's various answers to your question. It endlessly fascinates me, these people that behave in such a way that's at best going to get them a club ban, at worst is going to get them a criminal record, and they do not give a shit, and they film themselves doing all sorts, and it's on TikTok, it's on Twitter. I mean, every time somebody rings me up, I will generally stick their name into Twitter or whatever, just to get, because, I mean, obviously people sound like choir boys when they're talking to me for some reason. I don't know why. I think they think that I've got the power to magic away their problems, or I'm going to sentence them. But, people just splash all sorts of images all over social media and don't think twice about it. I think, yes, the away day accounts are they a problem? Are we older? Are we seeing something that isn't a problem as a problem because of the generation we're all in, perhaps?
I'm quite heavily involved in social media, right? We run a fan channel where, our image as such, our promotional basis is based on social media. We promote the show on social media because it's a platform, it's an outlet for us to be able to do it. We've got a large TikTok, we've got a good sized Twitter, we've got, we're growing on Instagram, Facebook, etc. So it's a platform for us. Would I be publishing private footage of, punch ups at football and stuff like that? No, not a fucking chance in hell. Especially not Millwall. No way, because it's not what the account's there. But these accounts have got no interest in the individuals taking part in that. What they want is the exposure, because the more you have, the more exposure you have, the more potential revenue you get from it. So they will rob a clip from somewhere, publish it, and it's all about likes. And you only have to look at Snapchat, you only have to look at everything else. There's a certain, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's the real football fan element. It's the newer fan, the tourists coming in, the people who just want to moan about, oh, look at this, who are providing so much evidence. It's unbelievable.
And also as well, we talk about mental health and be kind. I mean, the one that springs immediately to mind that's done the rounds in the last few days is that Chelsea fan who's been interviewed by some podcaster outside the stadium, and he takes offence at something, and the air is turned literally blue, and he goes chasing off after to kick their fucking head. Have you seen it?
No, not yet.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's gone out.
My phone will beep in a minute when Amanda sends me the video.
I will. But no, it's gone viral, and it's clear that the bloke has got issues of some description, but he's put up there as entertainment, and everyone's laughing at him. Look at that wanker, look at this, ha ha, what a twat, blah blah blah. But there's so many, I think, I don't know what you think, Gareth, no doubt you're saying this, but there's so many different layers to that question. It's difficult to answer it. But I think the away day accounts, they've got 100,000 plus followers, that there's clearly an appetite and clearly an audience for that content, otherwise it wouldn't be there. But again, full circle, that's probably one of the motivators for us doing the podcast, because we wanted to present these people as real people, not just your stereotype Green Street-esque hooligan in Birmingham.
No, I totally agree with you. And I mean, before we come to a final bit, I mean, Gareth, what's your view on this social media craze now for football?
Yeah, I mean, that type of stuff that you're talking about, my issue with it is, I think, rewinding to what we were saying before about perception, and we presume because we're football fans and we are in that bubble and we go to games and, it's been our lives and all the rest of it. I think we can presume wrongly that, that is how everyone sees football and looks at football. And, you don't get why, you're stereotyped in a certain way by certain parts of society. I think my issue with it is those type of accounts can make it look like issues in football are a lot worse than they are. So, if they're going out looking for any footage of a scrap that they can find in any given weekend and publishing it week after week after week, there will be people who, casually follow football or perhaps don't go to games and just watch it on TV or whatever, who will be getting an impression that, oh, well, there is still a big issue here with, fight and with whatever, blah, blah, blah. And when, all the figures show that, the majority of people that attend football in any given season are law-abiding and are there to watch the game, socialise with their mates, have a drink, blah, 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 whatever, without crossing the line. But, stuff like that, I would file that under stuff that isn't doing us a favour as a collective again, really.
I totally agree with you.
It's given a false impression of football fans once again, and we've already got plenty of enemies on that score who want to brand us with the hooligan tag or brand us with the not to be trusted tag or the first to be policed or most closely policed. There are so many laws aren't there are still around football which absolutely baffle. The stuff around not being able to drink on a coach and not being able to drink in sight of football pitches and all things like this. And we'll all have our own examples of that. My one that I always bring up is that rugby league occasionally gets played at Anfield. And, I know one or two people who like rugby league, and someone sent me a picture once and they were in my seat. My seat. They were in my seat with a beer watching the rugby league. And I can't do that when I go in the same seat because I'm watching football and not rugby league. And that's just ridiculous. That's absolute nonsense.
The problem you've got is that the laws around football are from the 80s when football violence was massive. It was huge. Do I think football violence is now where it was in the 80s? Nowhere near. Most of the football violence or whatever is done between two groups what want to, and it's away from the stadium. Because, they don't necessarily want it near the stadium because obviously if it's near the stadium, potentially football bans, everything else come with it. They want it away so it can be more of a punch-up. But it's nowhere near the 80s. But there is a path where the police, clubs, AFL, FA want it to become as if it's a major problem again when it isn't. When if they just took a normal step, started treating football fans as normal human beings, most of it would probably stop. A high percentage of stuff what goes on wouldn't be there. Most of the trouble what the police get at away games is because a lot of the time they provoke that scenario, kettling, pushing people around where, I understand they use the line of, well, we've got to be intimidating because we need to gain control. But that's fine. But if there's only 40 of you and 600 football fans, you're not necessarily going to be that intimidating. So why do it in the first place? And until that changes and we can start drinking in the stadium, I mean, it's this myth of, well, if we allow drinking in the stadium, people are going to get pissed more. Well, are they? Because when they go buy a drink at half time, they're more likely going to buy a couple of pints and take them back to their seats and drink them slowly rather than trying to knock 2 or 3 pints back in 15 minutes. So, it works at football, at rugby. I can go to rugby and watch rugby and take 4 pints of Guinness back to my seat. In fact, I could take 20 pints of Guinness back to my seat and no one would care. But I can't do that at football because there's this image of, oh, well, you're going to throw the glass on the pitch, you're going to throw the plastic cup on the pitch, or you're going to do this, you're going to do that. When I think if we looked at the laws and changed them, I mean, the prime one, what Amanda said to me before, and Lewis, at football, you could be arrested for being drunk just by smelling of alcohol and being unsteady on your feet. So pretty much, if someone pours a pint down you and you've not drank any of it, and you stumble in front of a police officer, potentially he could arrest you for being drunk at football. But I could go to rugby and spend all morning in the pub before the game, barely be able to walk, and probably get dragged there by my pals, and the old Bill wouldn't bat an eyelid.
I'll just keep this quick because you'll probably want to wrap up quite soon, I would imagine. But I was talking to a copper recently down in a town where they've got both rugby and football, and absolutely spot on what you just said. He said, if anything, the rugby lot drink more and are more aggressive and antisocial, but the policing approach is, go on, mate, fuck off home and have a cup of coffee. Don't give me a headache. Go on, don't want to be dealing with you. Go home, sober up. Football fan, they're in handcuffs in the back of the van and in the cell.
And is that because the unknown to the wider audience, but to those within, me, you, Amanda, know that the Home Office pays police forces for football banning orders? So when you've got, in basic terms, a reward system for nicking people, you're going to want to nick people for certain offences where you can get FBOs and the higher up FBOs so you can get more money. And we're talking, what, 4.5 grand per person on an FBO? There or thereabouts. Last time I spoke to the man who knew, that was the figures he gave me.
Possibly, but also, like we all saw, didn't we, over the summer, everyone was churning out statements. Everyone was, concerned whether this season would pick up how last season left off. So as a consequence now, you still get coppers like Paul, the one that we had on the podcast, who act sensibly and with discretion. And then you get other police forces who will just nick you at the drop of a hat because they want the banning order and the stats. And I was talking to Melanie the other day. She's a solicitor we refer all fans to. And she said the drive for football banning orders, they are prosecuting people that they probably shouldn't be prosecuting just so they can apply for the football banning order.
And I think until you get rid of that, the rest of the stuff around football won't be able to change. So looking at the mental health and everything else around it won't change.
It won't. But, Gareth said earlier, and I completely agree with him. I think fans... we've all not spoken about fan behaviour, I think, for very good reasons, not least because everybody else does. So why should fans groups add their voice to, the crescendo of condemnation? But I think now we're at the point, if football fans, groups and individuals and associations can readily condemn discrimination, then they should be quick to condemn other behaviour, which, again, as Gareth says, has a knock-on effect for all of us. But
the trouble is that someone in football will think of an idea and then try and ram it down football fans' throats without, finding out if it's a major issue. Within racism within football isn't nowhere near the issue it was 25 years ago. But yes, there are individuals that do it, but a lot of the time it is self-policed. Yet they will jump on something and pretty much throw it down people's throats.
But then we are the ones with the platform, aren't we, Gareth, to provide the context and the nuance and the more thoughtful backdrop to these discussions.
But we're never approached by...
One thing I did with that as being an example is, I think it's just trying to be fair about it, and just, if you're a regular match goer and you have got a platform or you have got some kind of influence or, you have got some kind of standing within your group of supporters, call things out. And I'm always one to call for that, and I try and do that as much as I can with my platform, albeit that's lessened a little bit recently in that I'm not involved with the Anfield app anymore, but I've still got a significant following online and things like that. So when things happened around the Merseyside derby recently, I called it out, and I was able to call it out because when I got Everton fans saying, well, did you call out Liverpool fan behaviour? I was like, yeah, I made a video here when the Dixie Dean statue was targeted. I called that out. I made a video about it. There you go. So, I was able to say, well, I've done that about Liverpool fans and I've done it about Everton fans. Can you honestly say the same? Because people get too tribal about absolutely every point around football, and that's one of the problems football's got when fans are involved. But what I was coming back to say was, in terms of being fair, like, we can all say, and I was very much of the mindset for a long time as well, and there's still things now that I vehemently disagree with and don't like, and I've got plenty of things in my locker I could throw out right now and tell you about police treatments I've seen and things that I've had said to me and ways I've been treated, and my friends have been treated and all that. But what I'm talking about being fair, and when you see something good, and I've used this example several times when we've been talking on this topic. So Amanda, I'll bore you once again, and I know you went to this game, but when Liverpool played Sheffield United away when they first came back up into the Premier League after a decent break away, obviously there was some trepidation among Liverpool fans about going to Sheffield for obvious reasons, and the relationship between Liverpool supporters and that police force in relation to Hillsborough, etc., and blah blah blah. So obviously there was lots of talk within the support about that police force, how they treat us, what they're like. They're going to be unwelcoming. They're going to be nasty. They're going to try and provoke you. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. They're going to do that, the other. Obviously, someone somewhere within that force had the foresight to say, well, that's what they think is going to happen. Let's do something different here. And I remember getting off the train at Sheffield that day, expecting, a bad welcome, if you like, from police, police in riot gear and all that kind of gear that you've seen so many times at so many matches. And what we got instead was actually refreshing, because we actually got coppers saying to us, are you looking for a boozer? Like, are you going for a drink? And we were like, yeah. And he was like, that one just up the hill there on the left, absolutely fine for away fans. Enjoy the game, lads, that type of thing. And you're like, did that just happen? And then similarly, like going up to the ground, there were people drinking on the streets and things like that. Instead of being strong arm with those lads, there were coppers coming over saying, past this point, we're going to have to ask you, can you just throw your can in the bag and things like that. But it wasn't, it wasn't that. It wasn't being rude. It wasn't being aggressive. It was just, can you do this? Can you do us a favour type thing? And then equally on our way back to the station when we'd finished, I had a conversation with a few of them. And again, and there'd obviously been a conversation, stroke directive of let's try and bring this down a bit, instead of standing around with machine guns, batons, riot gear, and setting a tone of this is an attritional thing that you're involved in. Just dialing it all down a bit made a huge difference to my day, and that was my experience. So I wrote about that, and I said, been going the match a long time, been going away a long time. And that was a positive experience. And fair play to the coppers who made that work, because you know what? I'd like to see more of that. Do you know what I mean? And so, we've had, well, in the past, I'm still saying we can't get out the habit, but on the Anfield app, we had Owen West on several times.
Fantastic.
And he's a great fella. And, he's someone who's worked at the very top of policing and is now working incredibly hard in exactly what I'm talking about, but there's a big challenge there. We talked about cultures among fans before. There's cultures among the police and not good cultures. And, it's going to take time to challenge them and change them. But, Owen's doing his part. I think, football fans can do their part in challenging nonsense from people like Mark Roberts, but equally try and be fair and say, if you see something good, say, well, that was a positive experience. And, we want to see more of that and less of that. And I think, we've all got voices now. We've all got platforms. Fan media has absolutely gone through the roof. And I'm made up that it has, because I'm someone who's always loved fanzines going all the way back to the 80s. And I see, like, podcasts, video channels, etc., of almost being like the digital incarnation of that. But it's gone through the roof, and it's gone into mainstream. Fans are getting platforms on Sky and BT Sport and 5 Live and things like this. So there's plenty of us that have got opportunities to talk about this, highlight the good and bad. And I just think we should all be taking that opportunity more often.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I second your point on Owen. I mean,
Yeah,
Owen was fundamental. He was fundamental in us when we were on a 10-year ban with Leeds, where we had to go service station, get tickets, etc., etc. I think it was about 10 years, to be fair. And he was fundamental in saying, let them have access. Just step back, let them use the pubs. We'll police it softly. Don't turn up in riot gear, and it worked. He knew that his fans as such were more trouble than ours to a degree. They would try and cause the trouble. Ours just wanted to have a beer before the game, and pretty much he understood that. He treated us as human beings rather than this. You're all scumbags, and I'm going to police you like it, which normally has consequences and repercussions going down the path. Look, we've been talking for as long as your podcast. Your podcast is 1 hour and 17 minutes. We've just gone over that. So the way I always do these is that I like to leave the final words. I go round the guests or the panel who are always on and just say, have you got anything you want to say to the audience regarding your podcast or regarding a subject we've raised tonight? I'll start with you, Amanda, then I'll end with you, Gareth. So, Amanda.
Oh, on the spot. We've spoken about it. If you haven't listened to the podcast, take a listen to it. Yes, it is a long one, but it's a good one. And as we touched on, we've given people a voice that don't ordinarily get one. And I'm sure, being Millwall supporters, you will never, ever need any help from me. But if you do, contact details are in my bio on Twitter, and I'm here to help.
Gareth?
I think, I'd obviously echo that. I'd suggest that you listen to that podcast if you haven't done already, and would love to hear what you think of it if you do give it a go. And just to reiterate, something that I've been trying to get across, again, I worry about sounding preachy, but I just think, the thing about the self-policing that I was talking about before, I know that it can be incredibly difficult at times, particularly in terms of groups and in terms of how you're perceived, and and equally all these people who got fanzines or podcasts or whatever, they won't want to seem preachy, and there'll be certain things that they don't want to challenge. But I just think, as a collective, wide umbrella, the football fan collective, for want of a better phrase that isn't as wanky as that, but we can help ourselves, I think, in some of the stuff that goes on. So some of the more unsavory behavior at games, if we challenge it ourselves in that old school manner of not necessarily a clip around the ear, but just saying, like, come on, lads, do we need to sing X or Y? Like, my big bugbear is singing about football disasters, which Liverpool fans have been guilty of in the past in terms of Munich, which Man United and Everton fans are guilty of in terms of Heysel. There's stuff around Hills where there's always the victim stuff. All of that, I just think all of it is grim. I don't want to take rivalries out of football. I love it. I love a derby. I love giving opposition fans stick. But I just think there are lines there, and I think that's tragedy stuff and making families of deceased feel uncomfortable in football stadiums and stuff like that. It's just incredibly grim. And I just wish that people with influence within the football fan world challenged it. So if we could do that, that would make my day.
I'll echo that. And Leeds, get the 2 men that were murdered in Galatasaray.
Yeah, that's another example.
It was Galatasaray, wasn't it? If it wasn't, take that out, because getting it wrong would be catastrophic. But I'm at Istanbul. I'm completely and utterly with you on that. Quite how mocking people for individual or collective deaths comes under the category of rivalry is just beyond me, I'm afraid. Just doesn't, does it? Nothing funny about it, nothing witty about it, nothing clever about it. It's just shit.
thanks for that, Amanda. Throw me under the bus and then fucking bring us right down at the end as well. Cheers.
I was going to say something.
No, look, I think it's a good listen. If you've not listened to the pod yet, it'll be in the show description, a link to it in the show description. You'll also have a link to Amanda's details, and you'll also have a link to Mel, who is the Football Law Associates details. And I suggest probably saving both Amanda and Mel's number in your mobile phone if you misbehave at football. And even if you don't misbehave at football, it's handy just in case you go to a police force what wants to nick you for basically wearing a pink shirt or a pair of shorts or just for wearing a pair of trainers, really. It's always handy to have. Their show lasts about an hour and 17 minutes. Amanda said it's a long one, but it doesn't really feel like a long one. It's a good show to listen to. It's very thought-provoking. And I'm sure you can approach Amanda on social media if you want to continue the conversation, and maybe Gareth on social media as well. But I just think it's worth you listening to it and seeing. If any of the subjects raised in that podcast are of concern to you, gambling, drinking, drug addiction, drug abuse, I'll put some numbers in the description of this as well. But remember, our DMs are always open. We can listen to you. We can talk to you. Are we experts in the field? Fucking no chance. But we can help direct you in the right position. We won't ignore you. And I think, one of the greatest things in life is, it is okay not to be okay. And just because you're a fella don't mean you can suffer alone. So yeah. But other than that, I'd like to thank my guests, Gareth and Amanda, for taking time out your evening and getting involved. And check out their podcast and hopefully you enjoy it. Go on, Amanda.
I was just going to say thank you very much for being such a lovely host.
That's all right.
Yeah, cheers, Mickey.
It's in the post. No, you're all good. Right, that's it. That's a special for that Millwall podcast during the international break. And remember to give us a follow, give us a like. And if you're watching on YouTube, please press the subscribe button. It helps us a lot more than you could possibly imagine. And that's it. We'll see you again shortly. We've got another show out tomorrow. So, bye.